You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over to the website, check out everything and all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio, as well as all the different outlets where you can find this show. Now, one of those outlets, of course, is the simulcast in video that I put up on my live stream on my YouTube channel every night. That's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. The best part of that stream is the live chat room. It's inhabited by all the different Intrepids that like to come in and listen to this show. So go on over, find the family of Intrepids, listen tonight. And one of the special things about the video channel is while I may talk audibly on the radio, you can't see some of the pictures and the diagrams that I put up. Tonight we've got a few photos to go along with tonight's show, so if you want to see those, come on over and check it out, either now during the Odyssey broadcast, come on over and watch the simulcast in video, join the YouTube stream, or you can catch it in archive over there. Just come on over and subscribe. And hit the little bell to get reminders of the show. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening tonight. Folks, how's your sequestration going? Your COVID-19 quarantining, self-quarantining? Here in America, it's self-quarantining. You can get tickets and get arrested for walking in certain parks in certain parts of the country and things like that, which is kind of nonsensical. Because the government really can't do that, but we're not going to talk about that so much on this show, other than to state that I think it's a very bad policy for a free country. And there is no, by the way, declaration of military law. There is no declaration of martial law by the federal government. So you know what? This is a state-by-state thing. And this is where the states, the United States of America, comes into play. The states have a right to create their own laws, as long as they do not try to supplant the Constitution of the United States. They cannot be inviolate of the Constitution of the United States. That's where you see a lot of controversy coming up these days. So I hope you're doing well at home. I am. We're doing just fine. Once again, just not much change for us in my family, because my wife and I both work at home already. And we've been that way since 10 years ago. My wife is a massage therapist, Rainey. Some of you know her. She's a massage therapist, and she just started picking that up after 10 years of being a stay-at-home mom. And she got into that last December. And, of course, January business really started picking up. In February, she worked for a couple of the hotels in downtown Stillwater across the river from us in Minnesota. And then, of course, this whole thing hit and everything shut down. The contact shut down. Now she just found out yesterday that massage therapy, a massage therapist in Wisconsin, where we live, is considered to be an essential worker. So she might be able to start picking up some things here in Wisconsin. We'll see. At least running her private practice. And so that would be good. It would keep her mentally sane. Our children being home are the opposite. They keep us mentally insane. Love my children to death. Love my children. Love having them around. Love doing things with them. Sometimes too much. Sometimes I got to tell them, hey, leave that alone. I'm working. I can't do that right now. And when I'm done working, if I sit down to eat something, a sandwich, and watch something on TV, watch the news for a half an hour, and I got my kids asking me, come and play Go Fish with me, the little one wants. And I turned her down yesterday, so I got to do that today. I don't want her to grow up having embedded in the back of her head, every time I asked my dad to do something with me, he said no. So one day doesn't create that. But over the sequestration, where my kids are a constant fixture every day, all day long, they're always bickering and fighting because they're enclosed. And I keep trying to tell them, focus on loving each other. Focus on being good to each other. What is all the darn bickering about all the time? But it's kids, sibling rivalry. One kid picks up something, the other kid wants it. I wanted that. It's mostly that comes from the little one. She still hasn't quite learned that yet. But so it can be a little trying at home with kids. If you got kids at home, I feel your pain. I love my kids, love having them around. But when there's no outlet for them other than the yard, sometimes it can get a bit trying here. A little more for mom, because mom spends a whole lot of time doing stuff for them all day long. And sometimes she just wants a break. And there's nowhere to send her right now, so she can take a break. I could send her to the hotel. Here, you go take a, let's get you the jacuzzi tub suite at the local hotel, which is less than a mile from here. And we could probably do that for her. So we'll think about that and see if we can make that work for her. And anyway, that's my situation. What's yours like? How's it going at home? Hope you're not losing your sanity too badly, and hope things are going well for you. Hopefully we'll see this thing start to subside pretty soon. Businesses will start reopening. People will start being able to go back to work. Yeah, there will be a new normal, quote unquote, that they're calling it. But, the new normal is the same old normal, just with a couple of new features. So wouldn't be too worried about it. And at that, let's move on into what we're going to talk about tonight. I want to talk a little bit about Jerusalem and some features in Jerusalem, mainly the temple in Jerusalem, the historical temple. And I think that this is interesting stuff, especially if you grew up in literalist Orthodox Christianity, or you grew up in a Christianized situation. By Christianized, I mean we may want to call ourselves Christians, but how many people who claim Christianity really live Christianity? Not many. And so we are a Christianized nation as opposed to being a Christian nation, which they once tagged us as. Pardon me. So, what I want to look at is something that's interesting because there are historical mysteries bundled all around it. We've got the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where it is said that Solomon, back almost 3,000 years ago, built Temple 1, the big temple in Jerusalem. But that was destroyed during the Babylonian captivity 500 years later. And then when the Israelites were released to go back home, they went back and they built Temple 2, which stood until about the time of King Herod. And then Herod came along and he rebuilt that temple and expanded it and made it this big, beautiful edifice, bigger and grander than it was before. And, of course, that was destroyed during the Roman occupation in about 70 A.D. And so that temple, all that's left of that was the compound, was what today you see, and I've mentioned this before, the Wailing Wall, that one section of the lower compound of the temple in the southwest, where that wall stands and people go there to pray because it's a remnant of the old ancient temple. And then, of course, there was the Roman Antonium Fortress, which was to the northwest corner of the temple compound. And what's on the temple compound today? They say the Dome of the Rock. I mean, it's very familiar. You've seen pictures. We got some pictures we're going to show of these things tonight. So we're going to get into this a little bit and talk about the location of the temple and is the temple compound as we call it today, where the Dome of the Rock sits, is that really where the temple stood? Or was there a slightly different location just to the south of that? And we're going to talk about that a little bit and explain it a little bit. But first we're going to give you some history about it, about that whole site. And we talked about it, by the way, when we talked about King David, how David acquired the land for the temple, but never actually built the temple. It was his son Solomon who followed him, who built the temple there. And so we're going to talk about that. But first, I've got a little archaeology, a little archaeological note, if you will, that I think is some very cool stuff. There is a road that they have recently uncovered in Jerusalem. And I think it's very important because it's a monumental Jerusalem street that was built by none other than Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea during the time of Jesus. And now this is what Israeli archaeologists are saying, that he built this particular street. And we're going to go through this. I'm going to show you some facts about this. But there's also a comparison that's being made over there, especially that this ancient Herodian street, whose reopening was by right-wing politicians and U.S. envoys who stirred the controversy about it, and that it was commissioned by the Roman governor that was hated by Jews and Christians alike. And so it's interesting, some of the political comparisons that are being made to this, I think, just for the sake of controversy and making a political controversy out of it. But it all started at, I've got a few pictures I said I was going to show you tonight. And before we get into it, let me talk about Pilate for just a second. The Roman governor Pilate, he was considered to be part of the Jesus myth. And we've talked about myth as being not necessarily mythological, but the myth as a structure, the stories, the compilation of stories. Yet there was no historical evidence that he existed. And it wasn't until the discovery of that cornerstone in the 1960s in Caesarea Philippi, which is the Roman city north of the Sea of Galilee, kind of northwest of the Sea of Galilee in Israel. That was the Roman seat of the governorship of Judea. And this is where Pilate's palace was and so on. And they found a cornerstone that had his inscription that dedicated a building called the Tiberium. It was a gymnasium. And I've got a picture of that cornerstone here. I think this is the copy of it that was put in place, and the actual stone is in the Jerusalem Museum. But here you go. This shows... Now, if you look at this inscription, look at it. It's in Roman, Latin, ancient. It says at the top, you see the word Tiberium, and that's the name of the building. And right below that, you see the last few letters of Pontius, I-U-S, and then Pilate, P-I-L-A-T-U-S, Pilatus. So it's saying the Tiberium, that this was dedicated by Pontius Pilatus, and it calls him the Praefectus of Judea. And so this is an interesting cornerstone that was one of the first historical, hardcore archaeological bits of evidence that showed that Pontius Pilate actually was alive and well and was the prefect or the governor of Judea at the time of Jesus. And so this one other picture I want to show you here is of the Pool of Siloam. Now this pool right here, you've heard of this. If you had Sunday school or were in church, you heard about the Pool of Siloam. It existed in the time of Jesus. And it was located in the old city of David, which is the lower portion of the city of Jerusalem. You can visit the old city of David. I think it was all of like 13 acres of what is now the city of Jerusalem. But that was the original city that when David conquered the city of Salem, that was inhabited by the Jebusites, their city was Mount Opal, O-P-A-L. and or Ophel. It's Opal, Opal. And Mount Opal was the city of David, is what it became. That is ancient Jerusalem. Now that's considered Old Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter. It's contained in the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem today. And this pool, Siloam, was fed by the Gihon Spring. And this pool now, this street I started talking to you about, this is where it starts an ascent up the stairway and up an old stairway, which is mostly under the city now. It's in like a tunnel. It's been uncovered, and they've done some archaeological work, and they've cleared this place out. And it is from this pool that this road or street that Pilate built up through, the pool is located at the southern end and the lower in altitude. It goes kind of downhill, the lower end of the old city of David. And this city, Pilate built this street going up to the temple through the old city of David. And they found this street, and it looks like this. I'm going to just jump to another picture. Oh, by the way, the pool of Siloam, you may have heard of this in the story where it says Jesus healed the blind man. It said that people would gather, the people of the city who were sick or infirmed, they would go to this pool to bathe in the waters, because it was said that angels would come and stir the waters, and when the waters stirred, people would jump into the water, thinking that this would heal them of their infirmities. And so this is the pool where people would gather. And Jesus sent the man to the pool of Siloam to wash his eyes. Pardon my cough today. Dry throat, stuff like that. So, excuse me, I'm not infected with COVID-19. Just so you know. This is an ongoing, persistent thing I've had for years and years, 20 years. So it comes and goes. And just as a historical note, I had pneumonia once, a couple of times, scarred lungs, things like that. And of course, the occasional smoke doesn't help it much either. But the pool of Siloam, that's where we are. And let me just say, we'll get back to the pool of Siloam. All right, here's the pool of Siloam. Jesus, when he healed the blind man, it said he spit into the dirt, made a little clay in his hand, and put it on the eyes of the blind man, then told him to go wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. And when he washed his eyes, he had been blind from birth. He opened his eyes and he could see, according to the story of the miracles of Jesus. And this is the pool where he would have done that, the pool of Siloam. Now it's been reinforced and things built around it and so on, but you can see that this was the pool. Now if we move on to the next picture, this is the street that through the doorway elevates up. It's a stepped street because the street went up through the town of Old Jerusalem, or the city of David, and up to the Temple Mount. And this is the beginning of that. And you see these stones here, the beginning of this street. And it goes on to look like this. And it's all enclosed because it's underground most of the way. But this is the street as it comes off the stairway, and you see it's stepped every, about 20 yards or so. You see it elevate a step. And it goes up through the old city. And they've traced this all the way back. And they've also dated this back to the time of Pontius Pilate, that he is the one who constructed this street. Now, Israeli archaeologists, they've concluded that this stepped stone street was once used by Jewish pilgrims to reach the temple in Jerusalem, and it was built by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, best known for washing his hands at the trial of Jesus. And assuming he was really behind the street's construction, that suggests the historical Pilate was more complex personality than the corrupt and ruthless figure that the Jewish and the Christian writers describe him as. And the researchers say this. And it's also shed new light on the origins of this impressive walkway, which is now one of the highlights of a controversial archaeological park in East Jerusalem. And by the way, there is a book I read a very long time ago called Pilate. It's a novel. I'll see if during the show I can look this up for you. It was a novel written about Pilate, which took all the historical data that they seemed to have of him at the time and compiled this much different picture of Pilate as a man who was not out to get Jesus. He wasn't the murderer of Jesus, but he was a man between a rock and a hard place. He was a Roman official who was appointed by L. Aelius Sejanus, which we've talked about before, who was uncovered as a conspirator by Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius had him and his whole family put to death, 300 of his allies. Pilate's one of his allies, but he's out there in backwater Dust Bowl Judea, and he's pretty much told to mind his P's and Q's. And so when you had the Sanhedrin coming and asking for a writ of execution for Jesus, Pilate brushes him off at first. He's like, get the hell out of my face. I don't know who this guy is. I'm not going to give you a death warrant to crucify the man, which was a punishment reserved for the most vile criminals. I'm not going to do that just because you don't like what he's teaching. And, of course, they went through the whole thing and they held political sway over him. You know, we're going to tell Caesar that you honor this guy who calls him a king. And it really put Pilate in the hot seat. So I think there's a lot more to Pilate and what he did and accomplished in Jerusalem. He built the aqueduct that came into the temple. He built these streets to accommodate people walking up to the temple. He subdued rebellions in Israel. And so a very interesting man. But the research was published on Tuesday I want to see what year this was. This was last October. So it was published on or around the 19th of October. And it was in Tel Aviv, the Institute of the Archaeology of Tel Aviv University. And it analyzed coins that were found beneath and above this ancient street. And the monumental street is paved with massive stone slabs, as you saw in the picture. And it climbs to the southern side of the Temple Mount from the Pool of Siloam. And it's running through what today is known as the City of David, the most ancient part of Jerusalem. Now, in the early Roman period, up until the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 A.D., this was a bustling avenue, 600 meters long and approximately 8 meters wide. So you're looking at, convert the meter. A meter is what, about 31 to 32 inches, thereabouts. So 600 times 31 inches, you get the idea. I'm not doing the math because it's math. And it was about 8 meters wide, so roughly 25 feet wide. And it was lined with shops and taverns and all kinds of monumental features, such as a podium for public speeches and things like that. And sections of the street had been undergoing excavation since the late 19th century. And archaeologists had previously associated its construction with different rulers, from Herod the Great, who reigned over Judea from 37 to 4 BCE, to one of his successors. We're coming close to the end of the time in this first segment, and so we'll jump back into this more. But I've got one other little, it's a drawing I'll show you. I sure hope I put it in here. Let's see. And I thought I called it drawing, and perhaps I did not. I don't see it here now, so I may not have done this. But if I can show you one other picture, this is here's the temple site. Maybe this is it. Here we go. That's the drawing. And we got to go out on this picture. But you see way over on the right, that's the Roman Antonian fortress. Right in the center is the Temple Mount. And this is, by the way, the new theory about where the temple was located. And way down to the left is the lower end. This is the city of David, Old Jerusalem, Mount Opal. And way down at the bottom is the Pool of Siloam, and the street ran up through the center of this town, up to the southern wall of the temple site. And we'll come back after this break, and we'll talk about this a little more. So everybody, you sit tight. We're going to go out for a few minutes. Might only be a minute and a half on the video, but this is our ad break for Odyssey Radio. So you sit tight. We'll be right back. Hey gang, welcome back from that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid Radio Program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come and watch this show right now, this very minute. You can see the simulcast, or you can come back later and watch the simulcast in video. And that's over at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join the chat room over there going on right now live during this show with all the Intrepids talking about this show and other things over there, as most chat rooms do. So come on over and find all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and also my YouTube stream. Now we're talking about ancient Jerusalem, and I think this is fascinating stuff because archaeology and history, as you know and as we've covered many times, sheds so much more light on places and things that we thought we knew everything about. And so when you find archaeology that supports biblical history, it's even more fascinating because of the history of Christianity and the history of biblical topics. And so that's why I love this kind of history, and I think it's fascinating. And we went out and we were talking about this particular, let me throw it up here again for those of you who are just joining us in the second half. This is a drawing of the old city of Jerusalem. And this city was not very much. It wasn't very big. It was about 13 acres. And you can see on the left side of the picture is pretty much the lower city, the old city of Jerusalem. But this is all it was at the time of David when he conquered it. And this city then toward the top, this is where it says that David acquired a threshing floor from a guy. And I think it was, as we went through it when I was doing the apologetics on the book of David, or the King David, and the books of the Bible where he's historically listed, is that it was probably more than an acquisition. It was probably more a theft, but they color it as an acquisition. But the Temple Mount is where, at the north end of the city, Solomon built the temple. But then the temple was supposed to be that whole compound you see today as the Mosque of Omar. And then to the northwest of that was what you see on the far right end, the Antonia Fortress of the Romans during the Roman occupation. And it's shown as being much smaller than that. But there are current theories today which states that the temple didn't sit on what we call the temple compound today. That whole thing was the Roman Antonia, and that the temple sat just south of it, as you see it in this drawing here now. So this is kind of the proposal. We're going to hit that if we get to it in this program. And the Mosque of Omar, let me show you another picture. just so you can get this in modern, place this all in modern context. This is the Mosque of Omar. You've seen a million pictures of this. This is current day Jerusalem. Now, you can see behind this how the city expanded. Everything that we called the original city of David was just to the left of this and south down the slope, the old ancient city of David, nothing else. Now, this is the temple compound, they call it, is where the Dome of the Rock now sits. And over the edge of that, you've got, of course, this, the Wailing Wall. This is on the south end. Here, let me show you this picture here. If you look to the left side of the picture, you see that building on the far side of the compound? It's down below that area, and to the left, the southwest corner of the old temple compound, where you have this. This is the Wailing Wall. This is the wall on the right here is the wall that is said to be, well, it's known to be, the only remnant still standing of Herod's version of the temple, which would be Temple 2 in Jewish thinking, Temple 3 in Christianity. So it's called 2 and 3. He just really improved and rebuilt and modernized it in his day. And this is where Jews will go to pray. At this, where they line up against that wall, they tuck little prayers in the cracks that are written out. And so this is the one remnant of the old temple from the time of Jesus, the time of King Herod. And so that's the Wailing Wall. There's the Mosque of Omar. And so let's get back a little bit into some more of this data about this street that's coming up. These 100 coins that were identified beneath the streets paving the street that was built by, they say, by Pontius Pilate during the time of Pilate to accommodate people walking up from the lower city of David to the southern wall of the temple, that they now have to prove that the project must have been completed between the years of 31 and 40 BC, or AD. And this is the time when they say that Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea, and a little bit before that, by the way. And it was a period mostly covered by the rule of the infamous Pilate. And this is explained by Neshan Zentan. He's an archaeologist with the Israel Antiquities Authority and a PhD student at Tel Aviv University, and he's the paper's lead author. And just like today, coins in antiquity tended to frequently drop from people's pockets and could end up sealed under the structures that were built subsequently. Imagine finding 100 coins. I wonder if you dug up the streets of a modern city today, how many coins you would find along the way. Could you imagine if you had in your possession all the coins that have been dropped in New York City over the last 100 years? Probably have a stash. But dating using coins is very exact, says Dr. Donald T. Ariel, an archaeologist and a coin expert with the Israel Antiquities Authorities, and one of the co-authors of the article. Some coins show the year in which they were minted. And by the way, the article being the release of data, the publication of this street of Pontius Pilate's. And so some coins show the year in which they were minted. And if a coin found beneath a street is dated 30 AD, then the street had to be built that same year, or any time after 30 CE, or Common Era, or AD. And following multiple probes beneath the paving stones by Zanton and his colleagues, as well as by archaeologists in previous diggings, the most recent coins found were dated to 30 or 31 AD, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. And if you were also to date this to the life of Jesus, they say that he was about 33 when he was executed, crucified, but they also say he was born probably as early as 6 or 7 BCE, because he was born during the reign of Herod, and Herod died in 4 BCE. So they say Jesus was probably 2 or so at the time of the death of Herod, by certain incidents in the Bible story. And so if you date Jesus back that far to maybe 207 or 6 BCE, he would have been 33 around, 30 to 26 to 30 AD. And so all these dates, they overlap a little bit, and you got a fudge here and there. Pilate may have been the prefect before that time, a little bit before. And so this is some interesting stuff when they start trying to date this street. Now, this means the walkway, previously also dubbed by researchers as the Herodian Street, time of Herod, had nothing to do with Herod or his immediate successors. The new study concludes this, and it was most likely built after Rome took direct control of Judea, and specifically during Pilate's tenure as the governor or the prefect of Judea, which traditionally set between 26 and 37 of the Common Era of AD. And though some researchers believe he was there even longer period of time. So if he was there in 26, the time of the crucifixion of Jesus might have been very early in his tenure as the procurator, the governor of Judea. If he was there a little sooner, it does say that he subdued 5 rebellions. History says Josephus is part of the historical community that has placed him there, that he subdued these different rebellions over a couple of years' time. And we're not talking about war against Rome. We're talking about uprisings, groups of people, 10 guys, 50 guys, 100 guys that were put down, these rebellions. And there were 5 of these, and then along came Caesar and said, L. Aelius Sejanus, your sponsor, is dead. He's a traitor. And he had an anti-Semite, an anti-Jewish mandate for you to follow in Judea. I'm changing that. You're now going to placate the Jews. I want you to be good to them, in other words. And so this all changed with Pilate, and this is why he had the conflict he did with the Sanhedrin. And so some archaeologists have argued that the coins that are found that were minted under Pilate could have been lost in the area that was later covered by the street, long after they first entered circulation, meaning the street could have been built decades later, perhaps even just shortly before the start of the Jewish revolt in 66 AD, and that led to the destruction of the city. But not so, because then we should also find coins that were minted in those later periods. That's what Stanton and his colleagues counter. If you've got coins that you're finding on a street and you're using those to date the street, they're usually the latest date of a coin found on that street or around that street in the excavations was 30 to 31. Now, if this street had been built as late as in the 60s AD, you'd find coins minted in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and even the 60s AD in and around the environs. But they stopped at 3031 and were covered over by the street. So now we know that in 41, the year 41 AD, the Herodian dynasty briefly regained a semblance of sovereignty over Judea under Agrippa, Herod Agrippa I, a grandson of Herod. As a matter of fact, you find him in the Pauline stories, in the stories of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, Agrippa. And as one of his first acts, the new vassal king minted a huge amount of money. So much more than 1,000 coins issued by Agrippa the first had been found in Jerusalem, compared with less than 300 from the previous decades of the first century. But none of the relatively ubiquitous coins of Agrippa I had been found beneath the Roman stepped stone street. And so this is one of those. It's slightly subjective, but at the same time, it can offer fairly conclusive evidence that that street didn't exist, or that those coins found beneath it. The street was built at that time, and it was built before the time of Agrippa I. Otherwise, you'd be finding his coins from the 40s all over the area beneath those stones of that street. And so it's not, Stanton said, it's not just that we found Pilate's coins. We also have to look at what we didn't find and would have expected to find had the road been built after Agrippa I became the king of Judea. And from a statistical point of view, it's hard to imagine that this road was built after 41 because we don't have any coins from that period. So you have to say that that road was most probably built in the 30s, the early 30s, not as late as even 40. So coins that were minted during Agrippa's brief reign and in later periods are found at the site, but only above the pavement and in layers of destruction and charred debris that covered the street when Jerusalem was burned to the ground by the conquering Roman legions at the end of the Great Revolt in 70 A.D. And this means that the road was in use for around 4 decades, from sometime in the 30s to the first century to 70, when the Romans destroyed the city. And it seems that the coins uncovered support the notion that Pilate built the street, says Ronnie Reich, an emeritus professor of archaeology at Haifa University in Israel, who has previously led the exploration of the street, but he wasn't involved in Stanson's research. In the 1990s, Reich and his fellow archaeologist Yahav Billig found a bunch of coins under the pavement on one stretch of the street, with the most recent coin in that batch dating to Pilate's time as the prefect of Judea. And they concluded that the walkway was built long after the governor's tenure in the 50s of the first century by Agrippa II, the son of Agrippa I. Now, this rationale was based on the mention by Jewish historian Josephus that this Agrippa II had repaved the city streets in marble, as well as the fact that the paving stones showed few signs of wear, suggesting that the walkway was in use for a fairly brief time before the revolt and the destruction by Rome in 70 A.D. But the additional data provided now by Stanson and his colleagues supports the idea that the street is not post-Pilate, but Pilate proper. And this is what Reich reports now. Santon acknowledges that the I've been saying his name Stanson. It's S-Z-A-N-T-O-N. Zanton. He acknowledges that archaeologists have not found an inscription stating that Pontius Pilate built the street. And while it was definitely constructed during his tenure, we don't know with certainty, he says, that he was behind it. But it's unlikely that a project of such size could happen under his nose without his permission, the archaeologist said. And so this was especially true for the area around the Temple Mount, which was a flashpoint of conflict between the Jews and the Roman occupiers. Building a street that facilitated access to the holy site may have been a way for Pilate to ease tensions with the locals, while also attaching his name to a major building project and promoting Judea's absorption into the Roman world. And it's not part of what we're talking about tonight, but I believe that Pilate was also responsible for doing the same thing, cutting a deal with the hierarchy of the Jewish religious leadership, the Sanhedrin, to build an aqueduct that flowed directly into the temple. And this dates back to his era as well. And so Jesus may have walked on this street is something that was very intriguing to some people. Whatever his motivations, the discovery brings into focus a lesser-known side of Pilate. Christians, of course, remember this Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, as the man who, according to the Gospels, ran Jesus' trial and ultimately sent him to die on the cross. For Jews, he was a venal and brutal ruler who often offended their religious sensibilities, such as when, according to Josephus, he built this aqueduct using money looted from the temple. Now, that was one of the theories, was that he looted the temple money, like taxing the temple money. But I think more historical data has provided us some evidence that it wasn't looted, but rather supported by the Sanhedrin, and the temple money was used. While there may be some historical truth to that kind of a portrayal, there's also, it's inevitably colored by theological and political biases. And besides these sources, there are a couple of archaeological finds that are linked to Pilate. A stamping ring from Herodian and an inscription bearing his name found at Caesarea. And that was the cornerstone I told you about. And to these we can now add the evidences from Jerusalem showing that Pilate commissioned the stepped stone street leading to the temple, suggesting that, at least to some degree, the governor's administration was interested in maintaining stability and developing the province. And it's no longer possible to view this first period of direct Roman governance in Judea as one exclusively characterized by self-interest and corruption. That's what some of these archaeologists are concluding. And for Christian believers, the discovery also raises the question of whether Jesus ever walked the steps of the monumental street. Both ends of the walkway play a key role in multiple New Testament scenes. Jesus visits the temple as a child, and then again shortly before his crucifixion, and probably many times in between, while the Siloam pool is where he sends a blind man to be miraculously cured. And again, I showed you that picture. Let me show it one more time here. This pool of Siloam right here, this is the pool where at the lower end of the old city of David, original Jerusalem you could call it, the Jerusalem in Jesus' time, that this pool right here sits at the low end of the city, and it's connected to the Gihon Spring. There's Hezekiah's tunnel, which is connected to this. But this has this stairway, this stepped street of Pilate starts at this site, this sacred pool of Siloam. And it's connected to the Jesus stories and mentioned many times in the New Testament stories. And so large sections of this street can be accessed through a tunnel that's propped up by these heavy iron beams dug through the Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan. Let me show you that picture again. That's this one right here. And this shows you these heavy metal beams that are supporting the ground above it. So this is an underground tunnel. You know, archaeology, when you dig down, now it was covered up and the city grew over the top of it and over the centuries. And so this is what exists now. This is the street of Pontius Pilate that would have been open to the sunshine and the air. And so that's the place right there. So large sections of the street are covered by this. The project is, and by the way, it's the Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan and the ancient remains of the city of David. And residents have complained of cracks and other damage caused to their homes by the excavations underground. And so the project is supported by Elad, a non-profit organization that administers the city of David, the national park that it's become, and promotes Jewish settlement in Silwan. Now in June, the group hosted, this is June of last year, hosted a high-profile inauguration of what has been now dubbed the Path of the Pilgrims, which was attended among others by Sarah Netanyahu, the wife of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman. Now, Palestinian and left-leaning groups have accused Israeli authorities of using this project, the Street of Pontius Pilate, as a political tool to Judaize the area and emphasize only the Jewish historical connection to Jerusalem, because it runs under a Palestinian neighborhood. And so politics now playing a role. Go figure. The United States isn't the only place we have people playing politics. And so it's being criticized because it was attended by the conservative right-wing party in Israel and supported by right-wing ambassador from the United States. And so it's drawing controversy, this old street, a 2,000-year-old street. And even some senior officials within the Israel Antiquities Authority, they've criticized the project as bad archaeology that the IAA would not be proud of. And that's the Israeli Antiquities Administration. And so the systematic and peer-reviewed research by Zanton and his IAA colleagues does go a long way in bolstering the scientific credibility of the research side of the project. And it shows that the archaeologists involved based their conclusions on the evidence emerging from the ground rather than on politicized narrative or this biased agenda. So the accusation was saying they're trying to call this street Pilate Street associated with Jews that would walk through the city and go up to the temple to worship, and also aligning it with Jesus, another major religious figure who would have walked these streets in Jerusalem. This street in particular, from the Pool of Siloam up to the temple. And they're trying to... The controversy is that it's all the Palestinian versus Israeli controversy. Left versus right politics. And an historian and an archaeologist are going to eschew politics, current-day politics, when they're seeking for historical fact. It's that you can almost paraphrase the Indiana Jones quote. Archaeology is the search for fact, not truth. If you want truth, or if you want fact, not politics. If you want politics, go to the politicians and ask them. But archaeology is the seeking for fact, regardless of what the politics or the religion or whatever the philosophy going might be. And so their conclusions, they say, are based on the evidence that they found, that are emerging from the ground, rather than on the politicized narrative or any kind of a biased agenda. And so as a bonus, there's also some deep historical irony in discovering that the Jewish religious nationalists of Elad and their Christian allies in the United States must now come to terms with the fact that all this time they've been working to uncover and preserve the legacy of one of the most despised figures in Jewish and Christian history, Pontius Pilate. Now, I have a problem with Pilate being as demonized as he has been over the years. I don't think he was the bad man. I think he stated that he was part of a Roman philosophy of belief when he asked Jesus, what is truth? And we can get into that another time because we're almost out of time for today. But I showed you the Pilate. I want to show you one more picture. This is the temple as it would have appeared in the time of Jesus. Now, this is assuming that the whole temple compound was comprised of where the Dome of the Rock sits today, which is supposed to be right where that ancient temple sat. Now, it's very possible that that temple didn't sit right there, that this whole compound was actually the Roman Antonia fortress, and that the temple itself was just to the other side of that wall with the pillars you see on the far left of this picture, the southern wall of the compound, and on the other side would have been the temple compound, just a short stone's throw from that wall. But this is the way it would have looked, the big temple in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. So there you go, folks. That's all we got for today. We didn't even make it to talking about the temple, just talking about this street uncovered by Pontius Pilate. Interesting history. I love this stuff. I hope you enjoyed this as well. So we're going to go out for a 23-hour break, and we'll be back tomorrow. Sit tight. Have a good night. We'll talk to you soon.